Welcome. I'm Cheryl Mitchell, the president of Treleven, which is a retreat and learning center here in Addison County. And we work at the intersection of spirit, nature, and social justice, and have started working with Middlebury Community Television to do a series called Grounded Leadership, exploring the lives of people in our community who are making a huge difference. And I am thrilled and delighted today to have Joanna Colwell as my guest. Welcome, Joanna.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you so much. There's so many things that we could start with, and I'm just wondering, one of your current passions, and maybe your overwhelming passion, is around racial justice. And I'm wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about what you're doing, and then maybe we could delve a little more deeply into how you came to that.
Sure, I would love to.
Okay.
So I had a big racial justice awakening about 6 years ago, I believe, when the teenager Trayvon Martin was killed and the man who killed him was acquitted. And it just really kind of shook me up a lot. And I started just reading everything that I could find to read about racism and racial justice, and I learned a lot about American history, and I just kind of delved in, and that led me to want to work with other people and just see, is there anything I can do, even though I'm a white lady in the second whitest state? What can I do? There must be something I could do. And I ended up working with some other folks in Middlebury to start a Middlebury chapter of the national organization Showing Up for Racial Justice, which is basically a way for white people who are angry about racism, white people who care about social justice, to raise their voice for fairness in our society. And so we have been working together in Middlebury for the last few years. And right now our events that are coming up are this weekend. We have Sunday afternoon, Debbie Irving, who's the author of the book Waking Up White, is giving a workshop at the Congregational Church on this Sunday. That is December 2nd from 1 to 3 p.m. And we're really excited to just be helping to get the word out about that. It's a way for white people to look at, what does it even mean to be white? Her journey has been very much about learning about that. What does it mean that I'm a woman, a white lady in New England? And she always thought that race was something that other people had, you know? And so then she went on this journey and learned, as a white person, I do have a racial identity. And so she helps other people to learn about what that is and how we can learn to be part of creating less harm in the world. So that's coming up this weekend. I'm really excited about that.
And is she one of the people that you read? You said you had this awakening and you read
I did. I actually read her book more recently, although I had seen several videos that she's really good. And I saw one of her videos was shown to me at a workshop that was in the Northeast Kingdom that I went to, that was called Working for Racial Justice in one of the whitest states. So it was really about like what can Vermonters do, and that, you know, one of the things that we can do is look at, what does it mean to be white? What have we been socialized to believe about ourselves? And that's really important work for white people to do, and that's what Debbie Irving really does.
And you said also there's another film coming out?
Yeah, so Showing Up for Racial Justice Middlebury started a film series. We're in the second year of our film series, and we show films on the second Wednesday of the month, and they they all
At
have
the
it at the
Marquee
Marquee
or-
Theater.
okay.
Yeah, here in downtown Middlebury. We usually show them at 4 and 7 p.m. They always have some kind of racial justice theme, and we're really excited that our December film is The Hate You Give, which came out in October. It's quite an amazing film about being a teenager. The film stars Amanda Steinberg as a teenage girl who lives in a Black community but goes to school in a very affluent, white, very mostly white private school, and she has to constantly switch between like how she is at home with her family, with her community, and how she is at school. And then her childhood dear friend gets killed by a police officer, and she's right there when it happens. And it's a really intense movie, and it's also it's kind of actually problematic. We thought about not showing it. After I went and saw it when it first came out, I asked myself a lot of questions about, as somebody who advocates against police violence, I had a lot of problems actually with the way the film told the story. But we ended up deciding we were going to show it anyway, and just have a conversation about it with the community afterwards.
Is that what usually happens? Like, so you're showing a film once a month?
Right, right. So sometimes, the way we've been doing it is just like hoping that the film sparks conversations, that people have conversations with their families, with their friends, with communities. This time, because of some of the problematic things in the film, I think it's really important that we do like a little bit of a more organized conversation. So there'll probably be a conversation in the cafe area of the Marquee after each screening for everyone that can stay and wants to be part of that.
So I guess I sort of feel like you've been an activist ever since I've known you, and I've known you for many years.
True.
And I'm wondering if you could talk about did that come from your family? Did it come from a sparking event when you were a child? How did that grow and develop?
You know, my parents are both of them activists, and so I think it just sort of came to me naturally. Like some people grow up Buddhist, some people grow up Methodist, I grew up activist. I am Jewish, but we were always we were never practicing Jews. We were cultural Jews, and part of that, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes there is a kind of strong social justice stream in that. And that's definitely how my family was. And yeah, so it was very natural to me. I think I started organizing the anti-nuclear club in my high school, and then in college I was involved, at the years that I was in college was when a lot of universities or a lot of students were trying to convince their schools to divest from South Africa. So that I was involved in that at my college. And yeah, it's always been one thing or another, but I really, I feel the more that I learned about all of the advantages that I've had in my life because I'm white, the more I learn about that, the more I just feel like it's my responsibility to continually investigate that and try to learn more about how I can be different in the world.
So you're also a yoga instructor.
I am.
And I think sometimes people think those are very totally different worlds. There's the sort of laid back meditation world of yoga, and then there's the fight in the streets world of activism.
Yeah.
Can you talk some about how those things come together in your life?
Sure, I would love to. For me, my practice of yoga is very grounded in yoga philosophy. So even though the way that we practice, it is very physical. We unroll our yoga mats on the floor. You've been in my class. We do all of these postures. It's hard work. It's deeply relaxing also. It works on your mind as well as your body, and all of that is true. But for me, the way that I practice, there is this underlying framework that is the philosophy of yoga. and that philosophy of yoga describes an 8-limbed practice. And that's why in my studio I have this mural on the wall of a big tree with 8 limbs. And the asana, the postures that we practice, are one of the 8 limbs. So it's one part, right, of the whole practice. And really the first 2 limbs of yoga, which are considered to be the most important limbs, are called yama and niyama. All the yoga words are in Sanskrit. And the yamas are the ethics. So if you picture this great big like spreading oak tree with these 8 limbs, and then the first limb is ethics, and there are 5 really important ethics. And so that you could picture that as branches coming off the limb. And the ethics of yoga, the very first one is ahimsa, which means don't do harm, right? Or practice nonviolence. And that's, so I feel like the fact that it's first is really a clue to how important it is. So for me, that has meant, as I've deepened my practice, and I've been practicing since my 20s, so that's a long time ago, lot of practice. And what's been really interesting to me is keeping that philosophy front and center, and nonviolence. You know, that could mean different things to different people, but for me, it's meant, how can I investigate myself where I am in this time and place, in this female body, in this light-skinned body, in this, you know, fairly affluent community that, you know, and I know that our Addison County community encompasses everything. It's, you know, it's not an entirely affluent community. We have a lot of poverty here. And because I'm a yoga teacher, I tend to interact with a very affluent segment of our community. And what does that mean? And what are my responsibilities? And so for me as a yoga practitioner, it's been, what does it really mean to be nonviolent? It's a really big question.
Yeah.
And I think the racial justice work has come out of that, wanting to be nonviolent.
I also remember you talking about sort of strength and softness as being important, and it seems to me that that's also something that's going on in your activist work. Yeah, we have these 2 Sanskrit words that basically mean stability and ease. And that, so when you're practicing postures, you're supposed to cultivate these 2 qualities in yourself. Like if you're just totally stable, you could get really rigid, right? And if you're just all ease, you could just be really mushy. And so there is I think a lot of relevance to that when we do activism work, right? Like we want to be really strong, we want to understand what we're demanding, what kind of changes we want to see, we want to have a vision, but we also want to be soft because we want to open our hearts and like really be able to listen to one another and learn. I mean, I feel like everything that I've learned in trying to unlearn white supremacy and how it manifests in me, I've learned by reading what people of color have to say and how it feels to be a person of color in Vermont, in the United States, and to open my heart to that and not be like, oh, I'm just in my own world or my own bubble of privilege. So can you recommend, or is there a place that our listeners could go to find what you might recommend as starting reading or starting movies?
So many good books.
Okay.
So many good books. The book that I really hope everyone reads is called White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. And her book is really about, she's a sociologist, but for many, many, many years, she was part of what they used to call diversity training. So let's say there's a company or an organization that their staff is like almost all white, and they just seem to have a hard time both hiring and retaining people of color. So maybe they got the idea that, oh, we should do some diversity training in our organization. So they would bring in Robin and her co-facilitators, who are often people of color, and they would give these trainings. And maybe some viewers have heard of this or been part of one even. And what she started noticing over many, many years of doing these trainings is that white people just have the most difficult time talking about race. Like, it's almost impossible to talk to white people about race, and people would get defensive, people would get angry, people would slam their notebooks down, people would storm out of the room, people would cry, you know, and it was just like, she is the one who actually invented the term white fragility to describe this phenomenon. And this is why, to get back to your question about yoga and the idea of stability and ease, what I think it's so relevant is like, how can we develop the stability to be able to be in a conversation about race? You know, can we have the emotional stability? Can we have tools, like just the tools in yoga? We use our breath so much, right? To observe our own breath, to notice if our heart starts to beat really fast. Can we notice that? Because in our world, there's a ton of racial pain and racial tension. But the way our world is structured, that pain and that tension is born entirely on the backs of people of color. And that includes everything from the way, as a white person, you know, when I have a teenager with a recently acquired driver's license, you know, and you know, when she goes off, I mean, use this as an example, talking with a friend the other day, you know, when she goes to a party in her car, or our car that she borrows with her friends, which she hasn't done yet, and I'm not in any hurry for her to do, but at some point she'll do that. She'll take our car, she'll go off to a party with her friends. I'm not really worried that the police are going to barge into that party and start shooting people.
Right.
I'm not, that's not going to be a fear. I mean, I'll have other fears sending my teenager off in a car at night, but I'm not really worried that she's going to be a victim of police brutality. So that fear of your kid being killed by the police is born entirely by Black families.
Yeah.
Right? And then, you know, another example is childbirth. You know, most women, when they're getting ready to give birth, they have some trepidation, right? They're, oh, is this going to go well? I hope it goes well. Maybe they're hoping for a natural birth. They hope they don't have to use drugs, or maybe they're just hoping they can have a vaginal birth and not need a cesarean, or if they do need medical interventions, that they'll get the care that they need. And while they may have trepidation about the birth process, they're probably not worried that some crucial symptom's going to be ignored that's going to lead to their death. But we have a terrible, terrible disparity, right, between Black moms and white moms in terms of who lives and who dies and whose babies die. And so that, like, as white people, we need to be looking at that and like, why should that fear be borne by the Black community? I'm an American. They're American, like everybody deserves good health care, right? And so, I think part of the racial justice work is like, you know, like we hear Bernie Sanders a lot calling for, you know, everybody deserves health care. That is 100% true. Everybody deserves health care. And we need to acknowledge that the way things are now, a certain segment of our population doesn't even get, you know, they're not even approaching getting decent health care. So I don't even remember where we started. So like the idea of like racial tension and pain and suffering is like only being borne by Black people, basically, or by non-white people. And so then we have to start as white people, like examining that, and we have to have the stability to be able to have a conversation about that.
So if people want to become more self-aware, do they join, they read, obviously, you've said, you study history, go to the movie series.
Other tips,
what other
So
what
another,
else should
if you're
people do?
interested in learning more about this and you're interested in yoga, you could think about joining, we're going to have an anti-racist feminist yoga series at my yoga studio in January. And it's going to meet once a week. It's going to be 8 weeks long. And the first part of it's going to be like a 90-minute class that meets once a week. And the first part of the class will be a fairly typical yoga posture, yoga class. But then will be there will be homework, there will be reading, and we'll be watching some short videos on this topic, and then we'll be talking about it. And so that the hope is that whereas oftentimes these kind of conversations can be just really fraught, really painful, really difficult for white folks, that the yoga is going to give us, it's like this wonderful toolkit that we can reach into. And when we feel ourselves getting really emotional or we feel defensive, we have somewhere to go and we can stabilize ourselves, and we'll be in a group of hopefully, other people that are all there wanting to take that journey.
Right. So the information about both your contact information, but also about showing up for racial justice will show up after the show ends. Are there other things that you would like to raise for people to be thinking about?
Well, I guess I really like this idea that I got from a Black educator who was talking about the difference between being non-racist and being anti-racist.
Oh, interesting.
Like most of us, we don't consider ourselves to be racist. And we think racist people are like really hateful people. And the problem with that is our society is really racist. And so we can't really help but absorb, and it's really awful, but we can't help but absorb some messages. We get these messages from the media, from television shows, from news stories, and they're kind of surrounding us like pollution, right? I used to be an anti-pollution advocate, and you can't help it. You just breathe it in. It's in the water we drink, it's in the air. So I think that in a certain sense, racist messages are like that. They just surround us and they permeate our consciousness. And so if we want to get in there and unlearn and dismantle some of that stuff, that takes conscious effort. It's not enough to just be like, I'm not racist, like I treat everyone the same. Yeah. That's a very shallow and superficial way to look at it. So we want to go deeper in. We have to be willing to admit that we probably have absorbed messages of white superiority, and that that it would be a good thing to untangle some of that in ourselves and unlearn some of that. But then the idea of being non-racist isn't really good enough. We actually have to be anti-racist. And I get that. That's from yoga. That's from, if I don't want to do harm, I need to really look at where I am doing harm and where I could do less harm. And I have a responsibility to make every space that I'm in an anti-racist space. My yoga studio, my church, my home.
Well, I love the pieces that you write for the Addison Independent.
Thank you.
Seems like you're constantly challenging us to think more deeply.
I'm trying to challenge myself to think more deeply. And I honestly feel kind of ashamed that I spent the first 40 some years of my life, even though I was an activist, and even though I did, of course I knew that things were not equal in our world and that wasn't right. I didn't feel like that, somehow that didn't seem connected to me personally. And I feel like when I look back, I feel like I was in some kind of bubble that somehow I felt like I was separate from that. And now it doesn't feel separate, and it just feels like, I have to dismantle it in myself so that I can more effectively dismantle it in the spaces that I'm part of.
It's wonderful and inspiring to hear you talk, Joanna. I wish we had more time.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me.
It's been wonderful. And for those of you that are watching The information about going to the internet and finding the Facebook site for Showing Up for Racial Justice will be there. I'm sure that Joanna's willing to have you contact her directly. Her email address is there. I also want to encourage any of you that have issues that you would like to share with the public to call up the community television station. These folks are wonderful at helping to get people's thoughts and ideas out there. So, thank you.
Thank you.